Today, I want to share with you three common things that public speakers do that are wrong when they first start in public speaking. And no, it's not filler words. Believe it or not, filler words are not one of the three things that I find to be the most common things that speakers, when they're getting started, or even speakers that have been speaking for a while, do. So, what are those three things? The first one is focusing on themselves as a speaker. This one, while it seems obvious, unfortunately, too many people are so self centered. They're so focused on what am I going to get out of this? How am I going to look good? How is this going to look good for social media when I speak in front of an audience that they never even get to the audience? They never actually make that connection with the audience. So, how in the world can we do that? We need to, first of all, stop saying the word I as much as possible. Now, I experienced this. That's one thing, sharing about your personal experience. But when we talk, it's about we, using us, using words that connect the audience and yourself together. Sometimes you will say, you should do this, but you don't want to do that because then that makes it seem like, oh, only the audience needs to work on that. Myself as a speaker does not need to work on that. So we need to work on this together. This is something that we can do better. So using the words we and us versus you, they, them, I, words that don't include both the audience and yourself are words that you can use to help with making sure that you're connecting with that audience. But also with that is focusing in on them. What is the information that the audience would want to learn? What is the information that the audience can take away from the message that you're about to share? And what stories will actually relate with them? Don't share the stories that make you look the best. Don't share the stories that, while on one side it makes the most sense for whatever thing you're talking about, for perhaps your product or service that ultimately you as a speaker rightfully are trying to get people to buy, because you're speaking not just to give information out, but eventually build business from that. So yes, there is a side to this where it is selfish, if you will, because you are trying to gain clients. But if that's all you're doing is creating stories and analogies that make you look good, that make your product and service look great, rather than what makes sense for the audience to help them to be able to understand, to be able to learn from you, then you're going to be doing it wrong. So make sure that you are focused on your audience rather than yourself. And that's the first thing that most people don't do, is they focus on themselves. I focus on myself versus focusing on my audience. The second thing is not having a clear message. Most people want to get into public speaking and say, oh, me. I want to go on stage. I want to speak. I want to have a podcast. I want to do video content. I want to get better. And they just want to talk about anything. And now if you have a fear of public speaking and you're going to do video content, then yes, just start somewhere. Just start talking about things, even if it was how your day went, how your food was, whatever it is, there is that aspect to it. But under the assumption that you already are over that fear of speaking, and the people that make these errors, they don't have that fear of speaking necessarily anymore, but they don't have a clear message. I want to talk about this, or I want to talk about that. Or maybe they kind of start talking about stuff, but then it gets muddy because they get sidetracked and they talk about other things. So the next thing that most people do wrong is not having a clear and concise message. Here in this video, we're talking about the three top things that most public speakers do wrong. Very clear. I'm going to talk about three things that public speakers do wrong, especially when they're first getting started in public speaking. This is very clear. You know what you're going to get from this. Three things that people do wrong. And so if you're going to talk about fitness, finances, whatever it is, be very clear on it. And it doesn't have to be three things. It could be, this is the number one thing that you should do to get your financial house in order, or whatever the topic is, but be very clear and concise on that. And you don't have to state it right up front, but in that overall message, it should be that clear that this is what you learned today, essentially. And so having that clear and concise message will allow your audience to be able to understand the information at hand. And then number three, is not sharing from experience and your own personal experience, actually. Yes, there are times where maybe you don't have a story that fits perfectly with that audience and you're going to kind of borrow an experience from somebody else or a story that you heard from somebody else. But the more you can share your experience, the more you're going to be connected with your audience, especially if it's an experience that they have also experienced. For example, if I talk about an experience that we just had where we went on a 5-hour drive with a 2.5-year-old and a 5-month-old, and the screaming that happened, the amount of stops that happened that were 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, they were more than expected. That if you didn't have kids, you may not understand. But because I shared that story, and of course I could have shared this better, but by talking about that experience, now I connect with other parents that have been through a similar experience. And so sharing experiences that you have help people connect. And when you're sharing a personal experience, you can tell there's personal emotion behind that. If you're watching on video right now, you would have seen my face like, oh man, that 5-hour drive. You could just tell in my facial expression, and of course my voice as well, that 5-hour drive was not fun to go on, which actually turned into 6 hours because of all the stops. But it was 5 hours based on what the map said it was going to be based on the GPS. But share personal experiences. Most people won't share those for whatever reason, but that is going to be the best way for you to connect yourself with the audience, but also connect the message that you're sharing with that audience so they can understand that message and break down that information even better. Too often speakers want to go in and just be very technical. Here's the information, facts, figures, data, so on and so forth. Boom, you got it. And they don't want to go into detail. But when you don't go into that detail, and there are times and places where it's you just give the facts and figures and you go on. You don't share stories and analogies. But for the most part, sharing some kind of a story or analogy will really help break down that concept or that idea for your audience to understand. So if you're wanting to get better at speaking, maybe you've been speaking for a while, or you're just starting out, the 3 things that you want to avoid are: 1, being all about yourself on that stage and not focusing on anybody when you're speaking. Number 2, not having a clear message that your audience will be able to understand. And then number 3, not sharing experiences or stories of your own self that you have experienced. If you can fix those 3 things, you'll be so much better off as a speaker just doing that alone. And those filler words, don't worry about them. Yes, it's something to worry about, but these 3 things are more crucial for you to worry about than the filler words, with the exception that you're saying and ah every other word. Then maybe we need to work on that. But these are the 3 major things that I typically see as a speaking coach when I'm working with my clients to help them be able to overcome their lack of speaking prowess and help them become a better speaker.